Olga Schihalejev, professoressa associata di educazione religiosa presso la Facoltà di Teologia e Studi Religiosi dell'Università di Tartu in Estonia. La sua ricerca si concentra sulle opinioni dei giovani nei confronti della religione e sulla diversità religiosa, sulla contestualizzazione delle convinzioni religiose, sulle strategie, il curriculum e la biografia degli insegnanti. Ha lavorato in diversi progetti di ricerca internazionali come Religion in Education, un contributo al dialogo o un fattore di conflitto nella trasformazione delle società dei paesi europei tra il 2006 e il 2009, finanziato dal sesto programma quadro di ricerca della Commissione europea, in collaborazione con le università di Södertörn e Helsinki, e come diversità culturale e religiosa nella scuola primaria tra il 2014 e il 2017. È stata Principal Investigator del progetto di ricerca Fattori di contesto negli atteggiamenti e nelle convinzioni dei giovani in relazione alla religione e alla diversità religiosa. Ha lavorato come insegnante di educazione religiosa e ha scritto diversi testi a supporto dell'insegnamento e dell'apprendimento. È attivamente coinvolta nel miglioramento del programma nazionale per l'educazione religiosa e nell'organizzazione di conferenze annuali sull'educazione religiosa. Bene, grazie della partecipazione e l'ascoltiamo volentieri, professoressa. 20 minuti, 20.
Okay. Thank you so much, and hello to everybody. I come from Estonia, and it was snowing yesterday when I left, and it is quite warm here. Nice to be here and to meet all of you. Thank you for inviting me. In my presentation, I will give you a short overview of history of religious education in my country. And in doing so, I also talk about religious composition of my country and also how it looks now. Formal religious education starts already from the 13th century in our country. But of course, then only few students could, or few young people could go to school. And first schools, formal education, which gave formal education, were related to monasteries or the main churches. But since the 18th century, reading skills and were obligatory, and also a bigger network of schools began to emerge in my country. And of course, religious education was the most prominent part of all education. This is why people had to read to understand Bible and their own belief. In the beginning of 20th century, we had compulsory schooling of 4 years and later 6 years. And of course, also in the beginning of 20th century, religious education was part of education. But in case of Estonia, we had schools with Protestant religious education and also schools with Orthodox religious education. Historically, because historically Estonia has been mainly Lutheran country. In 1934, we had a big population and housing census. Then 78% of our people were Lutheran and about 18% were Orthodox. And Orthodox people could be either Estonians or Russians living in Estonia. So it wasn't too much related to ethnicity. Coming back to religious education, then this year we celebrate 100 years from a big reformation of our religious education, because in early 1920s, we had left-wing party which decided to exclude religious education from school education at all. So the dominant discourse in 1920s was that our children do not need any religious education. And then there were some Christian parties which started a referendum to ask people who lived in Estonia if we should have religious education or not. And it was voted very strongly for religious education. And then religious education was reintroduced 100 years ago, but it was reintroduced in a new form. So children were not obliged to go to religious education. It was optional. Also, nobody could force teachers to teach religious education. Also, it was stressed that religious education is a school subject, not church subject. So it has to have aims of school rather than any church. And also it was stressed that it has to be taught in a way what responds to pedagogical principles. And this man here is Peter Põld. He has graduated theological faculty, but he was our first professor of pedagogy. He studied in Germany in several universities, and so he was the main ideologist of new reformed religious education, which was kind of more disconnected from churches. Also, new subject matter was introduced to religious education already in 1920s, late 1920s. Which included discussions of how religion and science are related, and also a small bit of world religions was introduced. And this was in upper secondary school, not in primary school. So I think Estonia was in this way very different from other countries. Nowadays, we find in several Nordic countries non-confessional approach, but I would not call this approach yet non-confessional, but it was ecumenical. So children, both Orthodox or Lutheran or Catholic children, could come to one classroom to learn about religion. But it was still Christian, so if we had some Jews or Muslims, they didn't come to religious education, although I know some who are still living, they said, we felt very excluded because everyone went to religious education and we couldn't. We didn't have anything in this case. So from, sorry, we missed some of words here, but then we had these 50 years or a bit more than 50 years of Soviet occupation and a big state-driven atheistic propaganda was part of this. I would call it mono-religious atheistic religious education, what we had in all levels. For example, I went to university to study math, and we had a course on scientific atheism in the program. When we regained our independence in 1991, we had quite many questions how to proceed. But we couldn't start from the same as it was in 1940, before this Soviet occupation, because our religious landscape had changed dramatically. Of course, it wasn't only the contribution of this atheistic propaganda. There were other aspects also what contributed to this. But when we had our first census after regained independence in 2000, then only about 29% of population said that they have any religious affiliation. And about half of them were Orthodox, half of them were Lutheran, and then some other religions and other Christian denominations were also. So we have totally different situation now. We can't just copy-paste religious education we had in 1940s. So in early 1990s, of course, as a newly born or reborn state, we had very many changes in our society. And religious education was one of the most debated topics. Should we reintroduce religious education as it was in pre-war situation, or should we introduce new subject, or maybe we don't need at all? And we had very strong opponents of religious education, including roundtable of different religions, and also Academy of Sciences was very much against religious education. And then we had some proponents, mainly Christian churches. We have Ecumenical Council of Churches. It was and still is very pro-religious education. And one of the key figures, Pillevalk, is here, not this cat, but this woman. She was one who was building bridges between different parties, arguing pro and against religious education. And she was like new ideologist how to proceed now. And nowadays, since 2010, we have religious education in national curricula. But just some more words about religious, about this concept, what she worked out. So she proposed a contextual approach to religious education, which must take into account several factors such as historical, cultural context we live in, religious education, both in our own history as well as in other countries, also religious landscape and the legal framework we have, also expectations and attitudes to religious education, what we can't ignore, and how it fits into wider picture of national curriculum. So I tell a bit more about this religious landscape and also about expectations and attitudes. So what is religious landscape? We saw this big picture of gray area, people who do not affiliate to any official religion. It doesn't mean that they are not religious, but they just don't feel affiliated to any of religions. And so it is the results of the last census of last year, 2021. And now we have predominantly Orthodox country, because national identity of Slavic people living in Estonia is much more related to Orthodox Christianity. And also there are some parts in Estonia where Estonians also affiliate to Orthodox Christianity. Lutheran Church has lost during last 30 years most of if we compare to other denominations, then Lutherans have dropped over these years. And Orthodoxy has gained some more people, and also Islam is growing. if we look at different nationalities, and we have very different nationalities living in Estonia, we have about 70% of our population are Estonians, and they are mostly non-religious. And if they profess religion, it's mostly, but not only, Lutheran confession. As I said, Slavs are more affiliated to Orthodox, and also we have some minority nationalities as Finns and Latvians who profess Lutheranism more than other. Maybe one remark about other nationalities, that when they come to Estonia and live in Estonia, they lose their religion. For example, if I speak about Finns, in Finland, the percentage is much higher than Finns living in Estonia, for example. The same to, for example, Poles, who are much more religious in Poland than when they live in Estonia. Also, when we look at generational differences, then we can see that the younger generation are much less affiliated to religion. And we cannot ignore this fact when we come to religious education. When we go to the classroom, out of 30 students, in good case, we have 3 Christian students. And usually they will not say that they are Christians because they are so small minority, and also some anti-religious attitudes what are quite widespread in society. Now I come to the aspect of expectations to religious education. As I said, we had quite big opposition to reintroducing religious education. And now we have the last survey from 2020, large-scale survey, which asked about attitudes to religious education. And for the first time, we have asked it all before also, but for the first time we found that more than half people were supporting religious education. And the more educated people were, the more they were pro-religious education. But it also, the support is very much related to religious profile of respondents, atheists opposing religious education much more than people who are either seekers, religious or spiritual seekers, or also religious themselves. And also especially people who do not want that church or churches will have any influence on education are suspicious of religious education. And now, yes, I have 2 more minutes. I will talk just briefly, if we asked about religious education, what it is about. And in this context, we look at religious education as it is in national curriculum, and we have non-confessional religious education there, which aims at providing knowledge about different religions, supporting moral development, and especially developing an open identity and readiness for dialogue across different religious and non-religious beliefs, to support development of critical thinking towards the phenomenon of religion. And we have 3 courses, 35 hours courses in basic school, 1 course per 3 years, each 3 years, and 2 courses in upper secondary school. One is more about philosophy of religion, and another about religious landscape of Estonia in wider global context. And just to say that actually it is, although we have this in national curricula, it is very much up to school to decide if they have religious education or not. And mostly schools do not have any religious education, although we have it in national curriculum, but in some we have optional non-confessional religious education in about 10% of schools. And in religious schools, what we have 12 in Estonia, we have confessional religious education. And yes, for more talented students, we have every year Olympiad, where they can have had a competition. And that's all. My time is over. Thank you so much.